So, good morning. I thought today we could talk a little bit about the fears of the feminine and the fears of the masculine and how they tend to play out in relationships and, colleagueships and um, parenthood and so on, whatever the relationship is. And when I talk about relationships, it could be anything. It could be intimate relationship. It could be siblings or, as I said, colleagues or whatever. So we're not really just talking about intimate relationships or just talking about relationships between people who might be interested in one another. The biggest fear the feminine has is to be isolated and to be left in isolation, which means to the feminine basically that they don't have worth. The vibrational value of that feeling is one of unworthiness, which is very challenging one to get out of as a general rule, because in order to come out of the unworthiness, you need to go through anger and resentment and boredom and hopefulness and so on. So for the feminine energy, isolation or being left in isolation is a big fear, and a lot of people who are predominantly in their feminine tend to react to that fear. So when they feel that they're being isolated or put into isolation as such, it is the worst thing you can do for the feminine. The masculine, their biggest fear is to lose freedom. And if you're already thinking that, how interesting it is how the two, the masculine and the feminine poles are, they have such an interconnected triggering system that when the masculine feels that it's being contained or that it's not allowed to be free, it starts seeking for freedom and asserting dominance in a way that often is leading. So if you're looking at relationships, for example, let's just look at relationships or even father-daughter relationship, where the father is the masculine or the male is the masculine and the woman is the feminine, or the daughter is the feminine. It is terrifying for the daughter to be isolated and left, and they get really, really clingy. And then, of course, the masculine essence is about focus and going over there and getting things done. And when the feminine is clinging, the masculine doesn't feel free, which then triggers the masculine to be assertive or aggressive, usually, which then in turn triggers the feminine to feel like it's done something wrong and it's not worthy of love. So you can see how it just keeps kind of cycling over and over. It just keeps like going into this big vortex of unhappiness. And if you look at how to break that cycle, how to kind of do a pattern interrupt on it, what the feminine can do when it feels isolated, whether or not it actually was isolated or singled out and put over there by the masculine energy, is to learn to be really good to yourself. So really stay with yourself and be with yourself and love yourself and know that you have value. So learn to know your own value within, because you can always tap into that. And when you feel isolated, I mean, your masculine counterpart may have just been triggered completely by something entirely different, and they need to focus on that. It may not even have anything to do with you. And let's face it, whatever we think about other people is actually none of their business. It's always us who are thinking the things about people. So the feminine is triggered, and to really allow the feminine to come through that and break that pattern of escalating this situation escalating any further, is to really just mind themselves and nurture themselves and encourage themselves. And if you can't do it for yourself, and many of us can't, have a trustable friend that you can call and say, look, I'm having a really difficult time. So you're still owning your stuff. So you're not just blaming somebody else. This is not a blame call. This is about owning how you're feeling. Own how you feel, call your friend and say, look, I'm having difficult time with this. I'm having to own my feelings and I'm looking for support from you to help me do that, because the feminine grows through support. The masculine grows through challenge, and it's entirely two different approaches to growth. So what can the masculine do to break the vortex of escalation of relating to the feminine in this situation? Well, the masculine can learn to realize that, and this is like for the women, for the feminine, that the feminine needs to realize over time their own value and learn to self-soothe. The masculine needs to realize that over time as well, that they are in fact free. There is nothing ever that holds them back except for their own perception of restrictions. So we are so free, all of us, we are so free that we can choose bondage. And that is often something that is not talked about. It's like people kind of fall into relationships and fall into marriages and fall into parenthood, and then they feel that they're stuck. And it's not actually that they are stuck, because you can always choose something else. Certainly you can assert boundaries that will help the relationship to grow, whether it's, parent-child, father-daughter thing, or husband-wife, whatever, partners, feminine, masculine. But if the feminine could learn to self-nurture, and if the masculine could learn to know that they are free, there's infinite freedom. None of this blame game would have to play out, because nobody would feel restricted or dumped on by the other person. It does take, however, it's a bit challenging in father-daughter relationship, because, the daughter is often a child. Like if the daughter is an infant or child, they don't necessarily understand this. So the father or the parent or the masculine parent has to take responsibility of reassuring and the child and so on. So that's fair enough. But if it's like two adults, both adults are responsible for their own part in whatever is happening. So people often ask me, and it's amazing how just at this time people are asking about how to resolve conflict and how to stop this escalation, which seems to be rampant. And I've certainly experienced that as well. I don't know anybody who hasn't. But it's really, it all comes down to, if it's two adults in a relationship context, it does come down to, can both of them take responsibility of where they are, and can they have the willingness to meet each other? So it's not often easy, and relationships break down, and that's kind of the natural course of things as well, to a certain extent. The only person you're ever with forevermore is yourself. So there's no need for blame, but there is call, if you like, for understanding, and understanding the other, and that the other is not who you are, so that we're all different. And also that we are responsible for how we're feeling, what's coming up for us. If there is a persistent pattern like this masculine-feminine fear cycle, for example, both parties need to take responsibility of that cycle, because it's obviously happening, and it's happening again and again and again, and it can end relationships, and it has, for sure. But we all ever do what we can, which is something that is good to remember. all of us will ever do what we feel is the best with the knowledge that we have at that time and the tools that we have at that time. So there's no blame needed. And I guess my call for graceful meeting of each other with your fear, when you've been triggered by fears, I would so love to see that in the world. I know all of us can work on that a bit more, but yeah, if you're in your feminine, if you get triggered, go away and nurture yourself. If you're in your masculine and you get triggered, go away and realize and see the options, that you have options, that you are not cornered, you are not backed into a corner, and this is what you'll have to do. Just see that you have the options, and once you see your freedom, and once the masculine sees its freedom, and once the feminine sees its nurturing, they can meet again from an open-hearted space, which is really lovely.